Once that every morning he would go over the list of his friends still alive, and he felt afraid that if he forgot one, they would die.
And as he fought to keep old age and death at bay, Picasso set out to have a dialogue with one of his great Spanish masters and to turn a Velázquez into a Picasso.
One of the few times I saw the black side of Picasso was when he was working on the Velázquez variations and Las Meninas, and he was really fighting with the greatest Spanish painter. And we could hear him stamping around, easels being wheeled around, things falling on the floor, growls. And Jacqueline said, you know, it's going to go on like this until he's finished this series of paintings.
Picasso continued turning out art at an unbelievable pace. But people were beginning to question whether this new work measured up to his past.
I mean, if you compare Picasso's Women of Algiers with Delacroix's, I mean, Picasso's are simply ludicrous, like cartoon versions of great masterpieces. And because he still had almost total command of his facility as a painter, they still command a certain presence. But compared to his own best work and to the great paintings that he was using as a subject matter, they're pathetic.
The sloppiness is intentional. He wanted to sort of conceal his skill in the late work and to make them extremely expressive in a way that a child's paintings are expressive.
By this time, the center of the art world had shifted. It was no longer Paris. The artists of the New York school, Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, and Jackson Pollock, were sending shockwaves across the Atlantic. Nevertheless, Picasso's influence on the New York artists was inescapable.
I can remember Pollock, the first show in London. It was in the 50s, late 50s. I saw it. What was exciting was it looked as though it was the first new art that was un-Picasso-esque for 40 or 50 years. Turns out it wasn't really.
The world had changed around Picasso in so many ways. And whereas earlier he had been inspired by such changes, now he wanted to retreat. He had always thrived on attention. But now with Jacqueline as his gatekeeper, Picasso began to turn inward, to examine his art, his past, and to face the inevitable alone. On March 2nd, 1961, at the age of 79, Picasso exchanged marriage vows for the second time. His bride was 35-year-old Jacqueline Roque, his devoted protector for the past 8 years. Picasso was a living legend, but even at 80, the idea of resting on his laurels terrified him. He continued to innovate. He invented an entirely new technique on these sheet metal sculptures, and another entirely new method in the medium of lithography. Jacqueline kept Picasso in extreme isolation. In time, he withdrew even from his own children.
From one day to the next, I mean, basically. There was no explanation, so to this day, we still don't know exactly what happened.
You must keep in mind that he was quite advanced in age by then. Half of it may have been that Jacqueline was protecting him from all the family, all of those friends from before Jacqueline, because that way she could be more in charge. At the same time, she was protecting my father. That way he could work the way he wanted, in peace.
Soon, when Picasso's friends called, they were turned away as well.
Jacqueline refused a lot of Picasso's friends. All of my friends went through it. She closed the door to a lot of things, to a lot of people.
Then, in 1964, Picasso's former lover, Françoise Gillot, the mother of his children, Claude and Paloma, published her memoir, Life with Picasso. He felt betrayed and tried to halt the publication. But the book became a bestseller. After the book, Picasso's health began to fail. All at once, in 1965, when he was 84, he had ulcers, gallbladder trouble, and prostate problems. In great secrecy, he was admitted to a Paris hospital to have his prostate removed. In spite of the risk that he could die in surgery, he refused to write a will.
Picasso couldn't write a will. He couldn't bring himself to write a will because that would involve recognizing the fact of his own death.
Picasso was anxious to show that he had not lost his ability to create. In a matter of months, he was back at work. Picasso began an elaborate exploration of his own mind, his past, his lovers, and his art.
Late in his career, when Picasso has become a recluse, he has to sort of recreate in his studio all the events of his past, and these ghosts from the past come back, and the father comes back into the picture. The father is rather famous for enjoying bordellos enormously, and so suitably the father is stuck in a whorehouse watching them, painting them. Jacqueline, his wife at the time, is one of the whores, and this is all part of this extraordinary mythical world that Picasso kind of invented at the end of his life.
Picasso recovered his health, but he lost all sexual capability. For a man whose art and very identity were built around his sexual appetite, this loss was devastating. His new work was, perhaps more than ever, obsessed with sex.
He compared what was happening to him sexually as a very old man to the feelings he had when he was obliged to give up smoking. And he said, you know, the appetite remains even after the ability has faded. And I think that he had to be aware that the same was true of his art, that the appetite and ambition remained, but the ability to realize it had faded.
As he approached his 91st birthday, Picasso began a self-portrait. He had made self-portraits at every phase of his life. The wide-eyed boy, the cocksure 20-year-old, the depressed married man. But that spring of 1972, he confronted the subject that terrified him most, his own death.
He took me in one of his studios, a little room, and in the middle of the room there was an armchair. This time in the armchair was a big drawing, placed like a human being. It was placed in the armchair alone. And it was the drawing when he stares at his death. It was clear for me. And at the time we both stay silent. And he told me, I think that here I have something.
That fall, Picasso was hospitalized for pulmonary congestion. He didn't want anyone to know. Jacqueline nervously ministered to his every need, insisting to everyone that everything was fine. He remained virtually bedridden through the winter. On April 5, 1973, Jacqueline called Picasso's cardiologist. By now, every breath was a struggle. On April 8th, Picasso died, with Jacqueline as ever by his side. His son Paolo came to the burial, and a handful of friends, but everyone else in the family was turned away.
On the day of the funeral, it snowed. They kicked us out because, of course, Jacqueline said no. Paolo said no, so we were left outside.
Picasso's death set off a series of tragic repercussions within his family. On the day of the funeral, Paolo's son Pablito was among those turned away. Just 2 days later, Pablito drank a container of chlorine bleach. He survived this attempt at suicide, but his digestive organs were destroyed and he died 3 months later. 2 years after, Pablito's father, Paolo, Picasso's only legitimate child, died at the age of 55 from complications of heavy alcohol use. In 1977, Picasso's lover, Marie-Thérèse, committed suicide, but she would not be the last. Picasso's death was painful for all his loved ones, but his widow, Jacqueline, never recovered from the loss of the man who had become her master.
She was completely and utterly destroyed by Picasso's death. She was popping pills, drinking an enormous amount, in a state of total nervous collapse. It was painful and difficult, and every time she went through the hall, there was a huge photograph of Picasso, she would say,